yesterday we talked about saving a file, and we're saving the records from our database to a file. So today what we want to do is talk about how do we then open that file and basically get the stuff that we saved into our list so that we can either edit it, add to it, remove it, whatever we want to do with it, but we don't want to start fresh every time that we run the database. Okay, I added an open button because I decided to do this a little bit differently than I usually do it, or I've done it in the past. Usually what I've done in the past is just made it so that you can, when you open the program, it automatically opens the one file that you have stuff saved to. But because of the way that we did the save where we can choose the file, I figured it makes more sense that we be able to choose the file that we want to open. And that way you could say, like, you know, if you're saving Pokemon or whatever, you can save Pokemon from this deck and then Pokemon from another deck, I guess. I don't know how that stuff works, but okay. So anyway, I'm gonna show you guys some code, and I actually I did this last night to set it up, and then last hour decided I was going to do it a little bit differently than I thought I wanted to do it last night. So, but it's not going to be different for you guys. So, we have an open method, and I guess I'm assuming at this point that you're going to be able to add your own open button. You're going to be able to add action listener to the open button. You're going to be able to call the open method when the open button is clicked. Okay? So I'm assuming that you guys can fill those parts in by yourself. So let's take a look at this code. Some of you maybe remember from last year that we used a scanner object in order to read not only some user input, but also to read files. So some of this stuff looks very similar to what we did yesterday. We're going to use a JFile chooser. In this case, we're going to get the user's choice from showing an open dialog. Yesterday we showed a save dialog. Okay. We still want to decide here if the user's choice is an approve option. And then things get a little bit different here. Okay. So the comic file comes from, the file that we're going to read comes from the selected file from the file chooser, and then we're going to try to connect to that comic file using a scanner. Is this all making sense so far? Okay, so what a scanner allows us to do is basically read one line from the file at a time, and that's what we want to do. Okay, if you remember what we did yesterday is we created a file that looks something like this. Okay. So what we're going to be able to do is read one line off of that file, and then read the next line off of that file. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Reading just this string doesn't really help me. Okay. I mean, it helps me, but it's what I need to do is do what? Look it up. I need to set it as each time. I need to break it up, right? I need to say, this is the title, this is the issue, volume, price, month, and year. Okay? And so in order to do that, I use an object that's called a string tokenizer. Okay? And we can take a look at what that does. Okay? So what we're doing here is we're saying we're going to have, is it okay if I scroll up at this point? I mean, do you have scanner and JFile chooser and all that stuff? Yeah. Okay. So we're going to, like I said, use the scanner to connect to that file. I'm declaring the variable line from file here just so that I can keep on reestablishing what it is inside of this while loop. Basically, we want this while loop to keep going as long as the scanner has another line to read, and as long as there's more room in the array of objects. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. So that's why we have both conditions inside the while loop there. This is reading a line from that file. Okay, so reader.nextLine gets the line, let's say the line that starts with Thor, that's highlighted there. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just send that whole line to a new constructor in my comic book class. And we'll look at that in a second. But basically what I want you to know is that this constructor is going to take it and it's going to break up the string into its parts in order to set the values that it needs. Okay? So that's giving us that book at this book count. And then we're saying we're going to add one to the book count because now we've added a book to our array.
So it'd be book plus plus?
So book count plus equals 1 or plus plus would work as well. Yep. Okay? After we're done with this loop, that means either we ran out of room in the array or the scanner doesn't have another line. The file doesn't have another line to read. Okay? Either way, we're done reading from the file. We want to put the books on the comic list and then pack the frame so that we can see what we want to see in the list. Okay? This is a new kind of exception here, file not found exception. And it's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? Okay? Okay, so I want to kind of move on to the next thing. I will come back to this so that you can copy stuff down if you're not done with that. But I guess the first thing I want to do is just talk about kind of a review concept here, and that is when we started talking through Chapter 7 and taking some notes, you know, the things that you remember right now probably from that are like, okay, we talked about searching and sorting. But before we talked about searching and sorting, we talked about kind of like what's an abstract step, what's a concrete step, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of abstract things in here, things that we're not really sure exactly what's going on. But let's just go ahead and look at this, for example. Is reader equals new scanner connecting to the comic file a concrete step or an abstract step? I mean, it's a little bit abstract, right? Because we don't know exactly how the scanner does that, but we know what should be the result of that. Yes?
Yeah.
We know that we should have this thing that's able to read a file. Okay? Here we're just, is this abstract or concrete? Pretty concrete, right? We know what's happening there. Abstract or concrete? Okay, so again, that's one of those things where you kind of look at it and you're like, well, it's concrete. I know when the loop will stop, right? But it's also kind of abstract because we don't know just from looking at the code how many times the loop will continue to go, will iterate. Okay, so I think you could justify both of those answers. Is this abstract or concrete? That's pretty concrete, right? Is this abstract or concrete? Okay, so that's another one where I would say it's pretty abstract because I don't know, just from looking at this, how do I get a line from a file that just makes a comic book? You know, there's more steps that are involved in that than just saying, do this magical thing. Okay, abstract or concrete? Very concrete, right? We know exactly what's going to happen there. Troy, do you still have a question? No? Okay. So let's take a look at the changes that we made to comic book, and you guys have that kind of set up for yourself on the flip side of your paper. And I actually decided to introduce a new concept to you through this action, this opening action. Okay, so what I want you to notice here is that we have now two constructors for a comic book. This constructor just gets a single string, and that's the string that we're going to send it that we called line from file. Okay. Then we have a constructor that we had originally, which we used when we said use the dialog, get the title off the title text field, get the issue off the issue text field, etc., etc. So does this make sense to you so far? Okay, we have two different ways of constructing a comic book. Okay, we're going to ignore this for now. I'm going to come back to that and talk about that in a second, what that throws means. Okay, so to create a comic book, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to basically create a dummy date that says month -1, year -1. Okay, so I know that there were no comic books created in that month, but later on I want to make sure that I can change my date, so I have to create it before I do that. Okay. This should be review, but just so that you guys are understanding what's going on here, we use a string tokenizer to break up a string like this. Okay? And let me see if I can make the font of this a little bit bigger here. Okay, is that easier to see? Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. So what we have is a single string that has a bunch of colons in it. Now remember what we did, and you guys have this on your paper as well, we decided that we were going to use these colons to separate each part of the string. And what we're doing now is we're saying, now that we have this one string with these colons in there, we're going to use those to break up this token string. Okay? So we call each of these things in between those a token. We call this thing a delimiter. Alright? So this is the delimiter that we're going to use in order to get tokens from this token string. Does that make sense? Alright? I can give you a better explanation of this, and that's actually one of the things that we're going to do tomorrow. Okay? Yeah, that's right. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're saying take tokens, which is my string tokenizer, and give me the next token. Okay, so the next token is whatever comes from the beginning up to the first delimiter that we see. And so this is going to be Thor, and that's going to set my title to Thor. Hopefully that makes a lot of sense.
What's a token? I think I like token.
Yeah, so again, when you use a string tokenizer, the things that you're breaking your string up into are called tokens. The things that separate those tokens are called delimiters.
So the delimiters are the semicolons.
The delimiters are the colons, yep. Okay? Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set my issue to whatever the integer value of tokens.next tokens is. The way that works, we skip the delimiter, we scan until we basically find the next delimiter, and that is the value that is going to be put in place of this tokens.next token. So this is the string 3, this is the integer 3, we're setting the issue to 3. Does that make sense? Okay. Same sort of thing happens for the volume, same thing happens for the cover price, the same thing happens for the month, the same thing happens for the year. You guys following this?
Yeah.
Except for the cover price is a double, yes. Any questions on how this is working? Okay. Yeah, good. All right. So, there are some problems that could happen from this. Okay, so let's just say, for example, that somebody got to my file, or my file got corrupted somehow, and this got deleted from my file. Okay, so which line of code is that going to affect from what we're looking at right now? Set year, right? Line 25. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this, and we're going to run this comic book database. And again, I added the open button. Okay, so this is on my desktop. Shoot, which one did I change? Comic file. Okay, all right. So this is what happens. We get a no such element exception. Okay, so that's actually a different error than I got before when I was doing this. So we might have to make a little bit of changes here. This little snippet on top of here basically says, I know as a programmer that something could go wrong in here, right? Something like a null pointer exception or a number format exception. So if something happened to the file and instead of a 3 in there, it was a character or something like that. Does that make sense? Then I could have a number format exception. Are you guys following this? Okay. When we say that we throw something, right, or we say that this method throws something, it basically means that whoever told me to construct this way has the chance to catch an exception like this. Does that make sense? Okay. And so over here in the comic book database, which is on the other side of your page, we have this line that's telling it to construct using this line from file. Everybody good with this so far? Okay. And so what we can do is we can say, you know what? That's something that possibly throws an exception. Okay. So let's try this. And then let's catch the exceptions that could happen. Now, I'm going to show these to you in a shortcut, okay? So we can select this, and we can go to source, and we can go to surround with, try catch, okay? So when I do that, it automatically figures out that this constructor throws a number format exception and possibly throws a null pointer exception. Now when we just did this, it threw a different exception than when I was testing it before. Okay, so we can add that on if we want. But what I want you guys to understand is that this is a new capability that you have to say, like, basically what it is I want to keep this pretty clean and straightforward, but if something goes wrong, just throw it up a level. Throw it to the method or to the class that told me to do this, and let them figure it out. Okay? The last thing that I want to just talk about real quickly here, so first of all, let me just kind of tell you what I would do here. So here, if it's a number format exception, I would say something like, hey, your file is corrupted, right? I can't do much about that. Okay? Null pointer exception, probably the same thing. Your file is corrupted. Okay? So I would put something like that.
Show message.
Okay? And then I'll show you guys, so you could do the same thing for this null pointer exception. File corrupted. If you really want to cheat, you can go like this. Just do one catch and catch any exception that happens. Okay? Every exception, null pointer, number format, no such element, they all inherit from exception. So all of them are exceptions. Does that make sense? So now when I run this again, and I try to open that same file, it's going to tell me that the file's corrupted, which is a little bit nicer. I mean, it's not good, but it's a little bit nicer than seeing all that red text, right? Okay, so it still let me do this one, right? But the other one wasn't good. So let's go ahead and fix that. Just gonna, oh, I pasted the wrong thing here. So I think that's what it was, or something similar to that. Okay, close this, run it again. And there it is again. So that time I didn't get that error because I had the number in there.
How come it doesn't repeat it? Like it doesn't put the same thing for the form.
I'm sorry, what? I closed it and I reopened it.
Oh.
Okay. Do you guys have any questions about what we did just now? Yeah.
Could you like put something in this the kind of constructor where it's like, oh, if this file is already here, you don't use it?
You could. Yep. Yep, you could. Her question was like, can you basically check to see if the file has already been used, or check to see if a record has already been added? And yeah, you could. Okay. The one thing that I didn't talk about is, so first of all, you understand this idea that we're going to say basically if something goes wrong, just throw it. Okay. And let somebody else catch it. There are different types of exceptions. There are exceptions that must be caught, and there are exceptions that could be caught. Okay? These are exceptions that could be caught. Right? We were able to, I didn't show it to you, but this didn't have any errors in it. Does that make sense? We could have run it without that try catch. Okay? This, when we connect to a file, that's an example of an error that must be caught. Okay, if we take out this try catch here, oops, if I take that out, okay, this becomes an error. And it basically says the unhandled exception, blah blah blah, file not found exception. It's basically like you gotta do something with this. Okay, so there's different types of exceptions as far as that goes. Are you guys understanding what we're doing today?
Yeah.
Okay. Chris, question? Yeah. It doesn't show up in the list until you say open. Yeah.
Are those separate files when they, if you opened up that file?
So if I do this one,
Okay.
that's a different file. Yep.
Yeah, each thing you did. Do you even have each?